Space has been a source of curiosity for humans over decades now, and the more we improve our technology, the closer we get to our aim at exploring something that was once impossible. After making the first landing to the moon, sending satellites and connecting different corners of the Earth with one another, exploring other planets through space vehicles, planning to colonize Mars, it is now time to make advancements towards security in space. Movies like Star Trek have been influencing the concept of exploring new life in space, but before we do that, there has to be some sort of security available. But before we head into the details, what exactly is a Space Force? Some of you might have an idea after watching the show called Space Force, but let us give you a detailed insight into the concept. With motto Sempre Supra, which is Latin for always above, United States Space Force is a military branch that conducts space warfare and space operations. The United States introduced its Space Force under the name USSF as a space warfare service branch of the US Armed Forces. It is one of the 8 US uniformed services that was initially formed as Air Force Space Command on the 1st of September 1982. However, the Space Force was established as an independent military branch on the 20th of December 2019, with the signing of the United States Space Force Act, part of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2020. While the members of the US Space Force will initially be composed of uniformed and civilian personnel conducting and supporting space operations as part of Air Force Space Command. Over the next year, units and personnel from other parts of the US Air Force will transfer into the US Space Force. With the redesignation of AFSPC as US Space Force, approximately 16,000 military and civilian space personnel were assigned to the Space Force on December 20th, 2019. These assigned personnel are at present time airmen within the US Air Force. Appropriate personnel will have the opportunity to transfer into the new armed force and become US Space Force service members in a deliberate manner. So, what do we need Space Force for? To a greater extent, space has become essential to our security and prosperity, so much so that we need an entire branch of the military to focus on its defense. Just like other branches of the military are dedicated to protecting and securing specific territories like air, land, and sea, space is now too one of the essential territories. According to the authorities, it is extremely important to have unfettered access to space for national defense purposes. Space systems are woven into the fabric of our way of life. Space affects almost every part of our daily lives and is fundamental to our economic system. For example, satellites not only power the GPS technology that we use daily, but allow us to surf the web and call our friends, enable first responders to communicate with each other in times of crisis, timestamp transactions in the world financial markets, and even allow us to use credit cards at gas pumps. One thing to understand is that it will not be exactly as you think it would be. Long gone are the days of war with bombs and missiles. This is the era of technology, era of nuclear power, and era of controlling everything from outside Earth from space. On that account, communication is an essential part of operating anything from above. Imagine the power one could possess if the communication system is under one's command. The first weapon that this Space Force would get hold of is the power over the communication system. The US Space Force has been issued its first offensive weapon system, but it may not be what you expect. In reality, the bomb is a jammer, or CCS, capable of preventing adversaries from accessing their own military communication satellites. Although this may not sound like anything on the surface, it has tremendous consequences for modern armed forces that rely on satellites to obtain orders from home. In other words, once CCS is switched on, it would cut off opponents from their own satellite communications, including video conferencing, and prohibit them from receiving alerts of imminent US and allied missile attacks. This brings us to a very important question. Do we really need a Space Force? Or is it just going to give humans another battlefield to fight the war on? Considering the aims and capabilities of the Force, it can be said that military actions will be legal in space, but then the law would have to limit its uses. All major space forces, including the United States, Russia, and China, have signed the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. The treaty specifies that nothing in space can be asserted as the property of a single country, and that it forbids countries from stationing nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction anywhere in outer space, even in orbit around the Earth. However, it's still a race to be the fastest and the strongest. War doesn't really have to include bombs and tanks, but today it can take on a number of forms, such as biological war, economic war, and even space war. It's true that personal protection is critical, but it's always been a race to be at the top. It is more likely that this initiative will only lead to a battlefield to fight the war, a race to regulate communications and regulate the planet. It is logical to expect a space force protecting us from the unknowns of space, but do you think it is required right now? Or is it just another battlefield? Let us know in the comments box below.